Shalom Uvracha from Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. We're privileged this evening to study the Haftarah of Parashat Cheyei Sarah and the Haftarah, which is the second series of our studies of Haftarot. The Haftarah this week is taken from the first chapter of the Book of Kings. Kings 1, chapter 1. Wherein the text begins, and I'm reading from the opening sentence of the Book of Kings, that King David was old, he was advancing in years, they covered him with many garments, but he was not able to feel the feelings of getting warm. V'hamelech David zakein ba bayamim. It's important to note that this is an exact parallel to the expression that's used in the very Torah section of this week. And at least on one level of superficial study, one could suggest that the opening sentence of our Haftarah is exactly parallel, almost verbatim, to chapter 24, verse 1 of Genesis, where Avraham is described almost with the identical words. V'Avraham zakein ba bayamim. Those people following the text, you see it? It's exact word. David zakein ba bayamim. Avraham zakein ba bayamim. Of course, there's a major difference in terms of the age. David's zakein, David's old age is far removed from the old age of Avraham. Avraham was at least 140 when his son got married. It says in the Torah that Yitzchak was 40 years old when he married Rivka. And this is the introduction to the story of Isaac marrying Rebecca. So explicitly. And he was 100 years old when Yitzchak was born. If Yitzchak was 40 years old, it means that Avraham is 140 at least in the story. Whereas David's whole life was only 70 years old. He died at the age of 70. Someone wonders how the two phrases, half the age, right? Hamelech David zakein ba bayamim, Avraham zakein ba bayamim. At least on some level, the expressions are similar. The word ba bayamim, is an unusual term. Isn't everyone who grows old ba bayamim? What does ba bayamim mean? Coming on in days, moving on, advancing in days. Well, that's what it means to be zakein, isn't it? Every zakein is ba bayamim. How could you be a zakein without being ba bayamim? And I remember hearing many, many times. I heard it most often from my beloved and revered father, Zatzal, my great father, who was a rabbi in New York. My Abba would often teach that ba bayamim means not just a description of his age. He was now 70 years old. He was now 140 years old. No, ba bayamim. He came into old age with his days. Most people cannot really show much for their days. What did you accomplish? Well, maybe they could speak about a general accomplishment over a long period of time. Do you have something to say, something to show about each day? Ba bayamim. Can you come into your old age? May everyone who was listening, and everyone who's watching, and the whole world be blessed with great levels of old age, a great healthy, long, happy, sweet life. Can we enter old age with our days? My father always taught us, maybe before a person goes to sleep, they should review the activities of that day. Do you have something to show? Do you have something? Did you accomplish something today? Was this a meaningful day? What was? Excuse me. What was the highlight of today? What was the accomplishment of today? Ba bayamim. Well, today's a yom. So even though Avraham lived, as is described in our Torah section of Cheyei Sarah, Avraham lived to be 175 years old. But he came to old age with his days, not just with his years, not just with his decades, not with centuries almost, right? No, bayamim. Each day was special. Each day was meaningful. Maybe that's a model that we're supposed to follow, both in the life of King David, Zakein Ba Bayamim, and Avraham Zakein Ba Bayamim. And perhaps if a person does that, maybe they have a special blessing of extended life. Two people could live the exact amount of years, the same amount of years. One has so much more to show for their life. Perhaps precisely because they're Ba Bayamim, because they care enough, because they're sensitive enough, because they're dedicated enough to make sure that their days are filled with meaningful activities. And if I may, just one comment on the end of the sentence, chapter 1, verse 1 of Kings. Vayichasuhu babigadim v'lo yicham lo. David wasn't really that old. I mean, the Radak, Rabbi David Kimhi, one of the classical commentaries as well, other commentaries. I mean, what exactly happened to David? I mean, so some say he really had a very, very difficult and stressful life. And maybe he grew older, faster than many other people would have. He had so many wars, so many conflicts, so many battles. He had internal battles in his own home. The Haftarah describes one of them. In the Haftarah of Cheyei Sarah is a description about how one of his children, Adoniah ben Chagit, Adoniah son of Chagit, is trying to take over the kingdom instead of King Shlomo, who's supposed to be the king. And we learned there earlier in the book of Shmuel, the rebellion of Avshalom. What a tragedy in the life of David, another son of David who perished. So many problems. He had internal conflict within the family. Maybe that made him grow old. What is this particular emphasis on Vayichasuhu babigadim v'lo yicham lo? He had a particular problem with feeling warm. Now, there is a medical explanation. I have met people, elderly people, who really suffer from problems of not being able to take any kind of weather, which is not very hot. I once visited someone in a nursing home, and I didn't know which room she was in. I asked the name. I went over to the desk, and I asked, where can I find so and so? They said, "Well, go into room 104." She had her own room. It was June, July. It was burning hot outside, and I walk into the room, and it was so hot in that room. It was hotter than a sauna. In the middle of June, middle of July, and I immediately I was perspiring, and I wanted to be respectful to the person I was visiting. I didn't understand. When the heat was on the highest, the way we would set the heat, maybe on the coldest winter day, and this woman was suffering from some form of I don't know, is it hypothermia maybe? Where the temperature of the body is lower than most people, and the only way she was able to comfortably live is in very, very, very warm, in very, very, very warm rooms. She couldn't even walk out of that room to go to the dining room. You couldn't even wheel her in a wheelchair. She had to stay in that room because that room had a special level of temperature. So it could be that there is such a condition, connected perhaps to senior citizens, where lo yicham lo. But the rabbis are always looking for a spiritual explanation beyond the physical explanation. It's not to deny the physical explanation. It just means there's another way of reading it, or another element of reading it. And in the rabbinic eye, as is described in Tractate de Berachot, the 9th chapter of the Tractate de Berachot, page 62b, there's a discussion there about the fact that perhaps at one point in the life of King David, he didn't show total respect for clothes. Remember the story in the book of Shmuel? There's a story there in Samuel 1, a story which needs, of course, clarification. I'm talking about in chapter 24 of Samuel 1. Remember when David went and he tore a corner of Shaul's robe? Remember that story? And then it says there, Vayakam David, I'm reading Samuel 1, chapter 24, verses 5, verses 6. Vayakom David vayichrot et knaf ha-me'il asher l'Shaul. He ripped the corner of the garment of Shaul. And then it says he realized that he had done something which was improper, Vayach leiv David oto. Vayach harichein, sentence 6 of chapter 24. Vayach harichein, it was immediately afterwards, David saw, David's conscience troubled him. Why did he rip the clothes of Shaul? Now, contextually, we can explain, what he did. In fact, some people can even say it was noble of him that he ripped Shaul's garment and he didn't rip Shaul. He was like in the middle of battle. There's a way of reading it that way. But the rabbis say you have to show respect to everything in this world, including clothing. That's a new idea for many of us, including clothing. And I'd like to read the teaching in the Gemara, Brachot 62b. Amar Rabbi Yosei v'Rabbi Hanina. Rabbi Yosei, son of Hanina, taught, Kol ha'mevazeh et ha'begadim. Anyone who disgraces clothes. Sof eino neheneh mehem. It will happen at a certain point in his or her life that maybe they won't be able to enjoy the benefits of clothing. David HaMelech, according to this reading, it's a critical reading of his activity, and you see even in the sentence itself, it says that David understood. Now, is it because it was the royal garment? Is it maybe because you have to show special respect for royal clothes? Maybe it's a lack of respect for the king, for the monarch. Is it because David has to be on a certain kind of extended level of consciousness? But whatever it is, the notion that David HaMelech rips the clothing, and then vayechasu babigadim v'lo yicham lo, they cover him with clothing, and the clothing is of no avail. The clothing is of no avail in helping him feel warm. Maybe we have to learn respect, not only for people. Maybe we even have to start learning. Maybe we have to start learning levels of respect, even to that which we see as inanimate. Maybe anything which gives us dignity. Clothes add so much to our being. Animals, generally speaking, with all due respect to all the wonderful people in the world who knit and crochet and put together garments for their pets or for other animals. An animal can survive without clothing. Human beings are given clothing, and maybe it's a human gift. It's a human gift. One of the rabbis writes in one of the early writings in the Middle Ages, why is it that why do human beings need clothes more than animals? Couldn't God just create extra layers of protection for the human being during the winter, and then they could shed the way many animals do? So whatever clothes mean, maybe we have to show a certain level of dignity to our clothing. It's interesting when the rabbis speak about how the Torah begins and ends with Hesed. That the opening statements of the Torah deal with kindness, says Rabbi Simlai in Tractate Sotah. Rabbi Simlai teaches that the Torah Techilata Gemilut Chasadim V'Sofah Gemilut Chasadim. The Torah begins with the description of God's kindness and ends with the description of God's kindness. Okay, it ends with the description of God's kindness. That's pretty clear. The last statement that's made in the Torah about God is that God buries Moses. That's chesed, right? A certain level of sensitivity to burial. But the Torah begins with chesed. The rabbis quote, Rabbi Simlai quotes in his teaching in Tractate Sotah, a surprising text. I would never have chosen it. I would never have known to choose it. He chooses a text of one of the first actions that's described about God after Adam and Eve sinned. And that is, Vayas Hashem Elokim la'adam u'le'ishto kotnot or v'yalbishem. God created, God designed, God fashioned clothing for Adam and Eve. So it could be, and there's a discussion, why is that considered the beginning of the Torah? Maybe that's the beginning of the Torah of the world that we know. The world after the sin of Gan Eden. Vayas Hashem Elokim la'adam u'le'ishto kotnot or. Maybe if that's the first gift that we received after the Garden of Delights, maybe we have to show respect to that special gift of God. Exactly how each person shows respect, I guess, can be defined and can be translated and can be debated. But there is this certain level of kol hamevazeh et habegadim sof eino neheneh meha shene'emar v'hamelech David Zakein. The opening sentence of our text, the opening sentence of our Haftarah, King David was not able to benefit in his old age from the garments, perhaps on some spiritual level connected to the idea that maybe on a certain level of scrutiny, he did not show full levels of regard for the concept of clothing. May God open our eyes to the sensitivity of how to really live our lives properly, to reach the old age, at least of our father Abraham, happily and healthfully, coming on in days, being able to have meaningful days, all the days of our lives, and learning how to avoid the kinds of problems that King David suffered from, through the highest levels of regard and sensitivity to all of the forces and all of the blessings of life, especially the blessing of God. Thank you so much, Rabbi. Shalom.